Listen, I'm so glad you're here this morning. Listen, I love the outdoors. I love working in my yard. I love going to the beach, the mountains. I've got a happy place on my back patio, a screened-in porch. I love the outdoors, but I hate sleeping in the outdoors. There's just something about paying money to sleep on the ground that's just a little bit off to me. But a few years back, my two brother-in-laws and I, we decided that we were going to go on a 2-night, 3-day backpacking trip in the Rocky Mountains. And so we got there at about 9,500 feet. We're right outside of Aspen, and we had to climb 4 peaks over the course of 3 days at about 12 to 13,000 feet. And so I put on my 30-pound pack, and I started hiking. And as we're hiking, the first few hours, they're great. You know, we're seeing the trees, we're seeing the terrain. But all of a sudden, we get to the first pass that we've got to climb, and it's about 12,500 feet. And things are going okay initially in the process. But I get to about 150 to 200 yards from the top, and I can no longer breathe. I mean, a little bit I could, but I couldn't breathe. And so I sit down on this rock, and I'm literally thinking to myself, can they get a helicopter in here to get me off of this mountain? Like, I kid you not. If I'm lying, I'm dying. And so I'm in this place. I had trained for this. I'd worked out. I'd done all these things. And I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get over this mountain, let alone the next 3 mountains. I ate a Snickers or something like that. I think it turns out I was maybe a little bit hangry as well. But there was this whole idea where there was something in the atmosphere that I just hadn't taken into account. And it was messing with me in a big way. But eventually when I realized there was something in the atmosphere, or a lack thereof, that there was a lack of oxygen, and I had to take into account that there's something in the atmosphere that even though I can't see it, if I am going to survive, I need to take it into account. And once I figured that out, the other 3 passes that we climbed, I wouldn't say they were a breeze, but things changed a whole lot. I was thinking about that as a culture as well. There is this certain things in the atmosphere all around us that are unseen, but yet they impact the vitality and the vibrancy of our life. And they're things that if we don't take into account, that we're going to struggle to thrive, let alone survive. And so we're in the middle of this series called Built Different. And I'm just going to tell you today, the message is going to be a little bit different probably than any message that you've ever heard. But we're talking about this idea of being built different. And this concept in pop culture, the idea is that someone who's built different is someone who does not care. They're willing to defy cultural norms. They're willing to buck trends. And they are just built different. We said this is the person who they've got their own unique style or the lack thereof, and they're comfortable to step out and do it. They're the person that they're going to be willing, when you're with your friends, they'll have any awkward conversation that you're not willing to have. They were the person at the middle school dance when you all the guys were lined up on the wall. They were the one person who walked across and asked a girl to dance, and she was way above their pay grade, but some reason she said yes. Right? Built different. And so as we're talking about this idea of breaking the barriers of burnout, today we're actually going to talk about our relationship with technology. And I know that may seem strange, but there is something in the atmosphere all around us that if we don't take it into account, it's in the atmosphere of our world that we are going to be impacted in a massive way. Some of you know that. Some of you have seen that. And I'll just say this, if you're a part of the 2%, yes, 2% of adults that do not have a smartphone, first off, well done. Most of us are jealous of you. But also, I just want to say, you probably have something in your life that you will turn to distract you, to numb you, to help you check out on the reality of life. But for the rest of us, that's the relationship I want to talk about. It's a digital relationship. And I want to say this up front. I'm here to inform so that you can have the information to decide for yourself what you want to do. I'm not here to heap guilt on you about this. We get enough of that in culture, right? We've hear that we need to take digital detoxes and all of these different things. I'm here simply to inform. I'm not going to call you lazy or addicted or any of those type of things. But I will say this. Every single week when I teach, I've got a long file of failures in my life. This is one of the hardest ones for me to teach on because for the last 15 years, I've been trying to figure out how to have a healthy relationship with screens, with digital technology. And it often feels like I'll take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Then 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And I'll just be real. It's a struggle at times for us. And it makes me think, like, why are we so addicted to our phones? Like, what is it about them? And I think the reality is it's not so much our phones as the idea that we're seeking comfort, we're seeking relief from our life around us. At times we're just trying to numb ourselves out, and it has less to do with the phone and more of what we're trying to do. It's similar to this. If there's a person who let's say they consume a fifth of vodka every day, typically it's not because they love the taste of it, right? It's because they love what it does. Or if there's a person who's had a bad day and they go home and they have, whatever it is, they want to go for a long run or work out really hard. They may not like the actual act of doing that, but what do they? They love what it does for them. And not that there's anything wrong with the long workout or anything like that, but at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, why are we constantly trying to numb ourselves? What are we trying to escape? What's the reality that we're trying to avoid? And so at the end of the day, I think we're using our phones for not as much for information as we are for validation and for distraction and to find comfort and find escape. In fact, I heard this quote. This is from a famous movie producer, and I think we all probably can relate with this. He said this: I always have to be on my phone. I always have to be working with a screen. I always do, because if I'm forced to be alone with my thoughts, it forces me to think about the emptiness of my life, and I can't handle it, so I fill my life with noise. I pursue distraction to get rid of discomfort. I go to this to comfort my aching soul, but it's a comfort that heals too lightly. Not just that, but let's be honest, and we're gonna jump into God's word here in just a second, because it honestly has a lot to say about this. But if you think about it this way, technology is actually making us dumber. They've done surveys and studies of the Western nations, and they found that on average, our IQ has dropped 14 points. If you're like me, my IQ was not strong enough to know what that even meant. So I had to research, but that basically is from one category to another category because of our phones. Not just that, half of Americans would say that in some way or another their phones are burning them out, because that means our work has access to us 24/7. And so what are we? We're just this tired, exhausting group of people. Sleep quality has decreased. Now you might be feeling like, listen, I thought you weren't going to guilt us. I thought you weren't going to lay it on heavy this morning. Now I feel like I want to burn my phone and become a homesteader, move off the grid in Asheville and just live there, make my own soap, grow my own food. That does sound good sometimes. That's not what I'm saying, because here's really what I want us to think about. It's not about whether or not we always have access to screens. It is about whether or not our screens always have access to us. And the good news is we get to decide. And we do that by wrestling through, there's a question we all have to wrestle through, and it's this question: do I own my screens, or do my screens own me? But the reality is, whether or not we are dealing with this today, dealing with modern technology is actually not a new thing. So let me show you what I mean. If you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11 is where we're going to be together. If you don't have a Bible, we'll throw it on the screen for you as well. But Genesis chapter 11, let me just give you some context. This is thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's taking place right after Noah's worldwide flood. And what happened was they started to procreate and populate the earth. And there's this big group of people that have come together. And they're living in this city, and you're going to see about this technology that they had. Genesis chapter 11, verse 3, it says this. They began saying to each other, that's the people of this city, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used instead of mortar. So understand this. What they're experiencing right now is actually a brand new technology. They're in the land of Mesopotamia. There's 2 rivers there. This is where modern-day Iraq is. And the technology is actually bricks. For thousands of years before this, the way that civilization would work is that they would use stones, rocks, and wood to build things. And it worked okay for them, but one of the things that it would do is it wasn't waterproof. It was easily destroyed. And so in Mesopotamia, they did not have rock quarries. And so what they had to do is they would actually have to make their own rocks, which they ended up becoming bricks. And this was this modern advance in technology. Because all of a sudden, they could make these things that were weather resistant. They could mass produce them, and they could make them all the same size. And so all of a sudden, what happens is they're able to build these incredible structures that were indestructible, and so they could build these massive cities. And not just that, but this tar that they found in the river basin, it was actually this new substance. And so they would use this as mortar, and so all of a sudden, they've got waterproof places where they can stay. They've got cities that can withstand destruction, and it's a big deal. And I tell you that because the first thing I want us to understand about technology that we see here is that technology can be extremely beneficial. Think about that. It can be extremely beneficial. In fact, technology itself is neutral. We get to decide. I love technology. Technology allows us to FaceTime or whatever you Android people do, but it allows us to FaceTime with people all around the world. Anywhere that someone has an internet connection. I love to cook meat in my backyard, and I've got technology on my meat smoker that I can be anywhere in the world with my phone, and as long as I have cellular or Wi-Fi, I can control and monitor the tension. The temperature, not the tension. The temperature. That's incredible. Like, I love that kind of technology. And technology can be beneficial. I was reading this week, North Korea, it's one of the darkest countries in the world. But they're using technology. People that are escaping from North Korea are saying, we actually received communication from the outside. People were dropping SD cards and thumb drives with the Bible on them. And they were using GPS to locate where to, and they're dropping them out of balloons, right? So technology can be extremely beneficial, as we saw here in Genesis chapter 11. But, let's keep reading. Verse 4. Then they said, come, let us build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world. So one of the things that we see is that technology can actually cause pride. It can give, and I'll tell you how in just a minute here, but this idea of pride, what they're basically saying is, we're going to use technology to build this permanent, large city. And what it would do is it would show that they are this like genius group of people, and it would allow them to be known all around the world, and they would change from being nomadic people to this indestructible city, feeling good about themselves. They also said it's going to make us famous. And so in this context, to make a name for yourself, it was to lock down a lasting legacy. And so for them, this tower that they're building, it was more than a structure. It was really about being a shrine to themselves so they could make a name for themselves. See, what they would do is there were these religious structures. They were called ziggurats. Not cigarettes, ziggurats, all right? And what they were is they were these towers, and at the top, they would put a shrine to the gods. And the priests would climb up to the top, and it basically was their way of communicating with the gods. And so for them here, what they're saying, they're not literally, like if you read this literally, they're not saying, we believe we can build something that will reach up to heaven literally. But what they're saying is, we're going to be able to go so high into the sky that we don't miss this, can meet God on our own terms. That's what this was about. It was about meeting God on their terms and not on the terms that had been set before them, which is this posture of pride. But if you think about it, technology can give us an illusion of control. It allows us to feel like we're in control. For example, if we need a medical diagnosis, right? Like we can go right to ChatGPT and there's a 38% chance it's right. But it feels like we can be in control. Or how about this? If we want to find companionship, either real or fictional, but with our AI friends, or we can temporarily satisfy our impulses. We can control our image. Right? We can have this digital brand, this digital legacy that to some degree we can control. That's why you never believe what you see online, because oftentimes what are we doing? We're seeing someone else's A+ life when really they're barely at a C-. But what is it? We can give the illusion of control. And that's what happens here. What they're using technology to they believe they've got this control. But also, look at the last part of verse 4. It says, and keep us from being scattered all over the world. And so not only are they using technology as a way to try to gain control, but there's also this disobedience that's there. And in this disobedience, you might say, well, how are they disobedient? Well, right after the flood, Genesis, you don't need to turn there, but in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, it says, then God blessed Noah and his sons, and he told them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. So they were actually told, don't stay in one singular location. Go scatter across the earth. They're all speaking the same language at this time, but they decide we're going to come together. We're not going to scatter. And see, what happens is sometimes technology can lead to compromise. Think about it this way. They would have eventually had to spread out across the area if they weren't able to build these what they thought were impenetrable forces all around them. But what happens is technology has this ability to lead us to compromise. For example, we say, I want to be, this is not stepping on any toes, but I want to be better with money. We hop on our device, and before we know it, we wake up the next day and there's a package sitting on our front porch that we may or may not even remember ordering, right? Like impulsive. How about this? Think about this. As a Jesus follower, we feel convinced to be more engaged in the life of the people we're spending time with, or the people that God brings across our path. Think about the collective billions and billions of conversations that Jesus followers have missed out on because we've been staring at our phone when we're in the line at the grocery store, or when we're at the park with our kids, or when we're in the doctor's office. Right? And we end up compromising what God has called us to do. And listen, I want you to just geek out with me for a little bit. I want to talk about scientifically what is happening in this way where distractions are pulling us away. There's a number of different chemicals, hormones, neurotransmitters that are happening in our brain. The first one is called dopamine. And so here's what dopamine is. Here's how it works. Dopamine is this quick hit, feel-good chemical. And so in natural ways, we're not going to get a lot of dopamine like in a quick hit like we can with certain things in life. But what happens is there's this reward system in our brain that when we see a notification, when we get a like on social media, we get a hit of dopamine. In fact, it's 10 times the amount of dopamine that we would get from being in the natural world. It's the same hit that a person gets if they're taking a hit of drugs, if they're going to the casino and seeing the bright lights. It's the same exact hit in our brain when we are seeing notifications on our phone. And so developers and designers know that. The whole thing has been designed around that. But the problem, you're like, what's the big deal? The problem is it takes more and more to trigger that emotion, that chemical, which is why we end up becoming more and more addicted to these type of things. That's dopamine. That's impacting our brain. There's a second thing. It's called cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. And what this means is that
when we're constantly engaged with what's going on outside of us in the world around us, when we're waiting on notifications, when we're always engaged, it's almost like we have this light stress that's always going on in our life. Our fight or flight system is constantly activated all the time. There's just this underlying stress that we're like, man, I don't know why I can't get rid of this. When I was a kid, I was so carefree. When I was a young adult, I was so carefree. I bet if you trace it back to this very thing, you'll be able to find that there started to be a cortisol spike that took place. Too much cortisol leads to anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. There's one more chemical. This is known as the cuddle hormone. This is a good one. This is oxytocin, not to be confused with Oxycontin. Oxytocin, let me tell you just a little bit about this. As I said, it's the cuddle hormone. You can only ever get a small dose of this online. We learned this when our nation shut down a few years ago, right? We started to crave human connection. Digital worked okay, but it wasn't the be-all to end-all. But what happens is digitally, we're removed from these things. And so these three chemicals play a massive part of us being distracted, of us compromising our values. And let me just say this. Sometimes it's not even intentional. I don't know if you know this or not. If you're a parent with young kids, I want to just share this with you. But the average age that a young man is exposed to pornography is in the range of 11 to 13, with many people saying that it's actually moving to even earlier and earlier to about age 9. That's awful. And here's the thing. Most of the time, it's unintentional. It's unintentional. For many of us, when we were growing up, we almost had to go look and search for something like that, but all of a sudden, it's just there all the time. And so all of these things are in play that are impacting us, that are distracting us, that are making it so much harder. And what happens is at young ages, we're experiencing addictions and all of these things. And so as we get older and older, it can lead to just a life of compromise, and we don't even realize how we got there. Let's go back to our friends in Genesis chapter 11. We can see what else that technology is doing for them. It says this, but the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. He said, the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Sometimes it feels that way when it comes to technology. The other day, I was at Whole Foods, and I paid by scanning my hand. It was kind of cool. All right, some of you are like, what did they insert in you? Nothing. All right, I was just putting my hand there. All right, but I'm like, man, like, what is too hard for technology? Like, there aren't many things that technology can't fit. And so that's what they're feeling in this time. And so God said, let us go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. Did you ever wonder why we have so many different languages? It goes back to this. In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. So what's taking place here? What we're seeing is technology can destroy relationships. In this context, it was actually God lovingly punishing them because they were on the verge of ruin. But we see it. Sometimes it's God punishing us, I believe, at times for just the poor decisions we're making. But oftentimes, honestly, it's our own doing, right? Like, we are destroying relationships around us. We're missing out on human connection. Why? Because we're so distracted. We're so distracted with all of these things that technology is pulling us away. I was talking to a counselor friend of mine, and he was telling me that men today are dating and marrying much less because they're actually finding that they can find what they need relationally and sexually in the virtual reality world. That's going to destroy us long-term as a culture if we don't pivot and change. The Surgeon General said over half of U.S. adults now experience loneliness, with there being this key shift into this from in-person to digital. even in our own homes, right? Like we lose the people that we're living with, right? Because we get home, we're exhausted, and it's so easy to just veg out in front of a screen and turn our minds off. That we find ourselves texting with people in our own house because we're so distant and separated. They did a study of people. This is kind of interesting. They did a study of people canceling plans with their grandma. And it was fascinating. So check this out. People that would call their grandma, hey, grandma, I can't make it for dinner tonight. If they called their grandma, they would hear the disappointment in her voice, and they would say, oh, you know what, grandma? I can move things around. We can make it happen, grandma. And they would oftentimes rearrange their plans because they didn't want to let grandma down. But when they texted grandma, grandma, I'm not going to make dinner tonight, they often stayed committed to their plans to not make it to dinner. Why? Because technology just makes it easier to do certain things like that, and it can destroy relationships. Now, here's why I tell you all this. Listen, there's hope, there's redemption, there's something else in play. John chapter 10, verse 10. We're told that this is talking about Satan, the adversary, the devil. We're told that he is a thief. And John 10:10 says the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. Jesus says my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. And so I wonder, as we contemplate this, has our relationship with technology provided us a rich and satisfying life? Well, only you know the answer to that. Maybe it has. But I would suspect for many of us it has not. But it comes down to this idea of we're settling. We're settling for less than God's best for us, right? Like the thief wants us to burn out. And an abundance of technology leads that charge. A thief is always counterfeiting what God has created. The thief is always counterfeiting what God has created. What that means is he wants us to settle for less than God designed us for less than God has made us for. What does Jesus say? I've come for you to have a rich and satisfying life. And I want to just encourage you, that's not just for those that haven't made mistakes, because that's nobody in this room. That's not just for those of us that have not blown thousands and thousands of hours in front of our phones or our TVs or our tablets. This is for every single person. I've come for you to have a rich and satisfying life. And this happens by coming to Jesus and allowing him and him alone to be the one that satisfies the longing and the aching in our heart for connection, for meaning, for purpose, for value, for freedom from our thoughts when we're left alone with them. Jesus is the one who allows us to not have to numb ourselves on all sorts of different things. He came to set us free. John also tells us, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. And most of us in this room, if I was doing this talk 5 or 10 years ago, it would have been geared to people my age and under. But statistic after statistic tells us that it's just about every single one of us. We need to be set free from this, because it's impacting every single relationship, and most importantly, our relationship with Jesus. And we have been made for so much more. One of the things that we're told, Psalm 23, it's a famous psalm. If you grew up in church, you probably memorized it. We're told this in Psalm 23 that God is our shepherd. And it says this: he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside cool waters. He restores my soul. Anybody in here use some restoration of your soul today? But get this. If we're never sitting alone in quiet pastures, God will not restore our soul. He says, be still and know that I'm God. The restoration comes in the silence. The rejuvenation comes in the stillness. The healing comes in the moments of peace and quiet. And if we never experience them, our lives are going to be broken, confused, hurt, and chaotic. And Jesus says, I've come to invite you to something bigger, something greater. Listen, I don't know what the next step is for you. I'll tell you, for me, one of the things that I'm really trying to do is spend the first hour of my day off of screens. That could mean a number of different things for me. Sometimes it might be that I go for a walk outside. It might be that I'm sitting, journaling, praying, talking to God. Sometimes it's, reading something that's actually paper, not my screen. But I'm committing to that. Why? Because I want to create space. Because for too long, I've missed out on God leading me to greener pastures beside the still waters, restoring my soul. And I've made that mistake, and I've missed that, and I want to do better. And listen, this can feel hard, but do you know how a mouse eats an elephant? It's one bite at a time. That's how change happens as God comes into our life and works in and through us. It's not something we can do overnight. Here's what I want you to do. Ironically, if you have your phone, since you probably don't have a pen, I want you to write down, or I want you to type in your phone, what's one small step that God is calling you to make? Maybe you don't want to write it down. Maybe it's just you're going to talk to someone over lunch. What's one way that I can be more focused on who God has called and created me to be? Because every single one of us has a next step that we can take in this, one bite at a time. There was a missionary who lived years and years ago, a guy by the name of John Patton, and he was this incredible guy, and he went to this land of cannibals. He showed up there, and he's like, man, I want them to hear about the love of Jesus. And his story, like I said, it's insane. In fact, they would have to run and hide for their life as these cannibals would come and try to kill them with axes and cut down their houses. He tells in his autobiography, one time, this restless native ran at him with a hatchet. And he had the ability to communicate with him. And so he yelled at him, and he said, you are not being hospitable. Stop it right now. And for whatever reason, the indigenous person walked away and let him live. It's one of those stories that you can only tell your friends about, and they wouldn't even believe you if you heard it. Well, one time it all came to a head, and he got word that they were coming to burn down his house and to kill him. And so he escaped to a tree, and he's hiding out there, and he's hoping that nobody sells him out, that no one gives his location away. And so he spent many, many hours in this tree, and I want you just to hear in the stillness and the quiet of that moment as he's hiding out for his life. This is what he said in his autobiography. The hours I spent there live all before me as it were about a yesterday. I heard the frequent discharging of muskets and the yell of savages, yet I sat there among the branches, safe in the arms of Jesus. Never in all my sorrows did my Lord draw nearer to me and speak more soothingly in my soul than when the moonlight flickered among those chestnut leaves, and the night air played on my throbbing brow as I told all my heart to Jesus alone. I would not grudge to spend many nights in such a tree to feel again my spiritual Savior's spiritual presence, to enjoy his consoling friendship. God, I pray that whatever is distracting us from doing what you've called us to do, from being who you've called us to be, God, I pray that we would lay that down at your feet. God, I pray that we would be fully present with the people in our life and with you as well. God, I pray that each one of us in this room would not feel hopeless about this, that we would not be overwhelmed with guilt that turns to shame. But God, help us to know that you have offered a better way forward, and we don't have to settle for less than the more that you have made us for. So God, as we sing together, as we walk out of this room, as we go about our lives, I pray that we would take the next right step. In your name we pray. Amen.